Good evening. Thank you for joining us here this evening. Tonight is towards the end of the fast of Shabbat Tammuz, and I'm going to start off with a Siyum. That's very interesting. That every year the Rebbe encouraged that we should learn about the Beis Hamikdash during this time, and in the 3 Parochim series schedule of learning Rambam, we just today finished learning Hilchos Beis haBechiro. And so I want to just read a little bit from Siyum Hilchos Beis haBechiro. So towards the end, it talks about the Shmira. The Shachar Koidim Shial Amud HaShachar, before daybreak, before dawn, Yovi HaMamuna Shel Mikdosh. So there's a sheriff of some sort. Yitpoik al hakoyanim shebebeis hamoiked. He knocks on the door for the koyanim who are in the Beis hamoiked. I don't remember whether this mamuna is a Levi or a koyan. At any rate, he knocks on the door of the Beis hamoiked. V'heim poischin loy, and they open the door. That's the door to the outside. Not al zamafteach, and now they had the key to go to the inner, to the azora. Not as a mafteach, which was mentioned before. They were looking after the key. He takes the key. Posach as a shara koton. It opens the small doorway between the Beis hamoiked of Veino Azora and the main courtyard. V'nichnas mi Beis hamoiked Azora, and he enters from the Beis hamoiked Azora. V'nichnasu acharov hakoyanim, and the koyanim follow after him. That they have 2 torches, 2 burning torches. And the koyanim now divide into 2 groups. One goes to the west, which means towards the rear. So first one goes to the east, which is towards the front, to the main entrance, and the other one goes to the west, which means to the rear of the Azora. And they would scrutinize to see that everything's in place. Until both of these groups who have gone to scout out the area, they meet up. They come to the area of where the chavitin were made. That's where that's just on the, I think on the left side of Shar Nikanor was some bakery where they made the daily bread offering of the Kohen Gadol. Both of them meet up with one another at this point, this station. Oimrim Sholem HaKol Sholem, that they acknowledge that everything is in order. Ve'emidu oisi chavitin lasses chavitin, and immediately then the chavitin bakers start making the chavitin. I'm intrigued. What's the connection with the chavitin and with the as I said, this is a mincha brought by the Kohen Gadol every day. What is the deeper connection between the chavitin and the fact that everything is in order? Bear in mind that this is before, he says, Koidem Shial Amud HaShachar. So the fact that the chavitin makers didn't do it earlier and only then seems to be very much connected with the fact that everything was found in place. And I say I don't have an explanation. Okay, fine. The whole guarding, etc., was done every night, and the scouting out in the morning, before morning, to see that everything's in place. But the nights of Shabbos, they do not have the burning torches. Instead, they would check with lamps which were burning from before Shabbos, and I guess they were placed around, and so they would be able to see what they had to see without having to carry a torch. Right. Okay, this is the last halachas. Interesting that we're talking about the building of the Beis HaMikdash, and now we're talking about kind of the functioning, checking it out for the functioning. Now, the next section of halacha is Klei HaMikdash v'ha'ovdim boy. It's all about the daily functions of the Beis HaMikdash. So this is an interesting why this is part of Hilchos Beis haBechiro. Now, on the screen we have from the Kutei Sichos, volume Chaf Aleph. It's a Sicha of Parshas Vayakhel, and it has an asterisk by the title Vayakhel, and it says it's a Siyum Hilchos Beis haBechiro of the Rambam. So the Rebbe made this a Siyum on as we've just done, and then he makes a couple of observations. Parokov Shemoina, that there are 8 chapters in Hilchos Beis haBechiro. So what's the significance about number 8? So he doesn't tell you exactly. He says, Re'ei Braisa Meister Torah Ois Ches. There's a Braisa, which is known as Meister Torah. Also, I think Ois Rebakiva is another name for it. I didn't look it up today. At any rate, it goes through all the letters of the Aleph base and numbers and tells you every number, every letter, what it stands for. So you have there for Ois Ches, there could be a whole range of things which the letter Ches or the number Ches stands for. And the Rebbe says, go along there. You want to know why 8? Why are the 8 prokim Beis haBechiro? Look up Meister Torah and you can take your pick. Fine. I did not do that. I should have. I apologize. The Hilchos of Kuf Lamed Zayin. Now the Rambam is divided into chapters and into individual halachas. So the Rebbe says there's 137 halachas. Now, V'al derech l'shein haRambam Hilchos Chanukah per Gimel Sefer Halacha Yud Beis. In the Rambam in Hilchos Chanukah he talks about Hallel and talks about the style of Hallel being recited verse by verse, and the Chazan would say a verse, and the Tzibur would say Hallelujah, or the say Sestrom Mitzrayim, or they say Hoid Vashem Kitoiv. The Tzibur would respond, and the Rambam says, in all, the Hallel is divided into 123 verses. Simen lahem shnoisav shel Aaron. That's the Rambam's Loshen Hilchos Chanukah. So the Rebbe is taking the same license to count. There's about how many verses there are in Hallel. The Rebbe says he identifies that there are 137 paragraphs halachas in Hilchos Beis haBechiro. Simen lahem shnoisav shel Levi. So what's the number for 137? Of all the Shvatim, the one who lived, they said 12 sons of Yaakov, the one who lived the least is Yosef, 100 to 110. That's it says the end of Bereshis. And I think the Gemara says Loshen Rabbonus, Kaberes is Baaleho, that being in a governing position is causes a person to his life to be shortened. And here, and the one who lived the longest of the sons of Yaakov was Levi. He outlived all his brothers, and he lived 137 years. What's the connection of 137 to Hilchos Beis haBechiro? Shenivchar l'shores Beis haBechiro, because the Shevet Levi was chosen to serve in the Beis haBechiro, and therefore the Rambam divided into 137 halachas. Check up the Mechilta, which we'll come back in a moment. If I made a mistake, may Hashem atone. So I was duly curious, and I counted. I made a total of how many halachas there are in our print. It's actually 136. So the Rebbe says 137, and he says I'll confess I used the Vilna print. I did not use the Varsha print, or perhaps they had another print. I don't know. So that's first of all. So all right, when it comes to gematrias, we're always flexible with one. Plus, we have the introduction of the Rambam where he has the minyan mitzvahs. It can also count as number 137 or number 1, and etc. All right, but then the Rebbe refers to Mechilta, and I'm sure I've told you this before. I heard from the Rebbe once by Fabrengen that when the Tzemach Tzedek says Ayin Shom, he doesn't mean that you should rely that the Tzemach Tzedek knows what's written over there. He wants you to look it up. So the Rebbe gives a reference to Mechilta. So here you have the Mechilta on the left of the screen. Until the Beis Hamikdash was chosen, the Yerushalayim was fit for the Shekhinah to reside there. It becomes singular. Okay, that's not what the reference is to. The reference is the following: until Aaron was chosen, Hoyu Kol Yisrael, every Yid would be eligible to be a Kohen. Misha Nivcha Aaron, Yotzu Kol Yisrael. Then, from then, all the other Yidden are excluded. Shenemar, I think I misunderstood the first phrase. I think we said before the Beis Elam was chosen, the whole of Yerushalayim was fit. After it was chosen, then Yerushalayim at large is excluded, and only Har Tzion is permitted. And similarly, until Aaron is chosen, all Eden are eligible. Once Aaron is chosen, all other Eden are excluded. It's like a covenant made with salt, which lasts, which is last week's parasha. So, what's the Rebbe referring to? Here we're talking about what's happened over here. We're talking about the Maila of Levi. And the Rebbe is saying, Shenivchar l'shor. Why does the Rambam have 137 halachas? Because that's a remez to the life of Levi, and he was chosen to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. But actually, the proof for the Mechilta is to the contrary. Because he says, Asher l'nivcha Aaron is referring to the Kohanim, and not to the Leviim. And so now, are the Leviim, are they nivchar? Have they been chosen? It seems to be so strange that he's saying a statement that Levi is chosen l'sharis based on haBechiro, unless you're going to say it's Aaron from amongst Shevet Levi. It's strange. So room for further understanding of this. One more thing, and that is that in this sikha, the Rebbe talks about the fact that they did not carry the torches on Shabbos. And he asks, since we have a general rule that ein shvuz b'mikdash, that they didn't have to worry about an Isur Rabbanon in the Beis Hamikdash, so why could they not carry torches, burning torches, on Shabbos too? And the license would be, although it's also mid Rabbanon, but ein shvuz b'mikdash. So I was bothered by this, because is indeed carrying a live flame with oil, would that be an Isur Rabbanon or Isur min haTorah? So let's take a look. So here we're taking a look at Siman Reish Ayin Zayin in Shulchan Aruch. It talks about a burning lamp which is fitted to the door, which means when you open the door, you close the door, the lamp is swinging with it. So let's read this carefully. If the lamp is fixed to the door itself, if it's a wax candle, less of a problem. But if it's an oil lamp, so then also you're not allowed to open and close the door. When you're going to open and close the door, a bit of the oil will jump up closer to the wick, and that bit of oil will burn. So you're creating more of a fire. Or yusrachek mimenu ksas, or as liquid does, it goes bobs up and down. So then some of the oil will go further away, and that will cause extinguishing. I could learn it the other way around also, but that's the way the Alter Rebbe says it. Yeah. Perhaps what I mean by that is when the oil goes down, then there's more space on the wick for the fire to catch on. But all right, that's how the Alter Rebbe learns. Anyways, the Alter Rebbe is saying that swinging a burning oil lamp is an issue of Mavir and Mechaber. So why does the Rebbe say it's only Isur Rabbanon? It's Isur Deraisa. But the answer could be in the following last line: If you open the door very softly, you close the door softly, in a way that it's not inevitable that there will be the movement of the oil, it's not inevitable, then it's not osum in HaTorah, and actually you're allowed to do this, which is also, I mean, it can be relevant. Sometimes people want to move a table which has candles burning, so you're allowed to move it, and of course we would solve the problem of muksa by having chalas, etc. So then you're allowed to move the table very slowly in a way that it's not. So with candles, I said it's not such a problem because the flickering of this liquid, there's no liquid there to go up and down. Not much to talk about anyway. But if it were oil candles, so menorah, so you are allowed to move it very slowly, very carefully. Okay, so that's the Rambam which we had, as we said. That Sikha makes a Siyum Hilchos Beis haBechiro, and he asks why did they not move carry the torches? And here's the answer. If you remember, I asked the question. This is the next question that ever asks. Why is this part of Hilchos Beis haBechiro? Why is it not part of the daily function, which is the next section, Klei HaMikdash v'ha'ovdim bo? And the answer is that going every morning to check that everything is in place could be seen as part of the structure. Like the shmira is part of the structure. So also the checking that everything is in place is part of the structure. And therefore, says the Rebbe, although we have a rule of ein shvus b'mikdosh, that could be for the daily functions. When it comes to do the avodas, so then there is a general principle of ein shvus b'mikdosh. But when it comes to the building, so then we know that right at the beginning, the first page, the Rambam says you're not allowed to build a Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos. So therefore, it follows that even a Isur Rabbanon also wouldn't be allowed when it's got to do with structure. And therefore, since the Rebbe is saying that this is this is also the beginning and the end of Hilchos Beis haBechiro connected, talking about structure, and that you don't have the license of Ein Shvus b'Mikdash. Let's move on to our next shaila. And okay, so a friend of mine writes to me that earlier this week he had taken off his Rashi's Tefilin, and he was about to put on his Rabenu Tams, and somehow his Tallis fell off his shoulders totally, and now he's asking in the future, if this happens, should he put on the Tallis again? And then, if he does he have to make a brocho? So it's really a very unclear story here, because, and this quote which you have over here on the top of the page is from my work on the Siddur, where the Alter Rebbe has a chiddush in the Siddur. Let's say, I'm sure you know someone who happened to, you don't have to confess, but on Rosh Chodesh, and you are sure you're rushing to go to work, and you took off your Tallis, and there's, oops, I still haven't davened Musaf. So you want to put back your Tallis, obviously, to daven Musaf. Do you make a brocha? So the Alter Rebbe says that so long as you are wearing a Tallis cotton, then you do not make a brocha on the Tallis Godel when you put it back. Because when you took off your Tallis Godel, you weren't distracting yourself totally from the mitzvah of tzitzis. You were distracting yourself from this garment.
Are you on the phone?
What's the phone? What's the machine?
Oh, sorry. He's giving me a shiur.
So the Alter Rebbe says that so long as in the Shulchan Aruch it doesn't say this, but in the Siddur is mechadish that if you're wearing your tallis cotton, a tallis cotton, and you took off your tallis knowingly that you're bearing in mind you're not going to put it back on again. That was your mindset, and then later you realize, oops, I still haven't have to daven musaf. So now, is it plausible that if your tallis fell off and you're wearing tallis cotton, should that be worse than when you took off your tallis godel consciously with no intention to wear it till tomorrow? If the tallis cotton bridges the gap, even when you took off the tallis godel with no intention to put it back, how much more so it should bring the gap when you fell off? However, it's not so clear. And there's a svara to say that when you took it off consciously, there's a consciousness about the tallis godel and the consciousness about tallis cotton, and therefore there's no total distraction of the mitzvah of tzitzis. But when the tallis fell off, you weren't thinking about it, and then perhaps that is considered a hesach hadas, and you have to make a new brocho. So, written about this in the Siddur, in the Miluim, at length, and I quote here from Rav Levin. He writes that if you were aware that the tallis is falling off, but you didn't manage to stop it, then don't make a brocho again. To summarize, if your tallis fell off and you want to put it back on again, you're entering into a bit of a sophic area whether you should make a brocho or not. Normally, the minhag ha'olam, and I believe there's also people who saw the Rebbe when it happened by the Rebbe, minhag ha'olam to put it back on without making a brocha. But this friend of mine, he's asking about Rabenu Tam's. And it's not so important in my mind to have to wear a tallis for Rabenu Tam's tefillin. Therefore, my advice was, don't put the tallis back on, just put on Rabenu Tam's, just with your hat and jacket, without putting back the tallis on, not to enter into a sophic of doing a mitzvah without the appropriate bracha. Having said that, b'hashgocha pratis, we had the Kinnos Hashluchim of the UK earlier this week, and every kviyas we have that the morning of the Kinnos, Rabbi Yonason Golem Shliach in Sheffield, he teaches a mimer. He chooses a mimer and he teaches the mimer. And in this mimer, it's in the Meluket, Mamorim Meluket, Chelik Dalet. It's a mimer from this time of the year. And it talks about the the second last chapter of Tilim, where it's mention of weapons there. And it talks about Chamushim all bnei Som Eretz Mitzrayim, and about the 5 weapons: a sword and a spear and a bow and one of those and a club and a shield. And it goes through all of those, explains each one be'avoda. That there's a mile of a sword, you can neutralize an enemy who's near. An arrow, a bow and arrow, you pull it further away, put it further to yourself, and then you can also kill an enemy who's far away and even might be hiding from you, but you're able possibly to reach them through a bow and arrow. And the message there is, the more beetle, the more you pull towards yourself, the more introspection there is, then the greater effect of beetle hachitz, of the challenges from afar. Having said all that, then you have towards the end of the mimer, what is the union of tris? What is the avodah meaning of a shield? A shield is to protect from arrows and other missiles. What is that? Levishas Tallis Tefilin koidem atfila, or b'shas atfila. Donning the Tallis and Tefillin before davening and during davening. Because at the time of davening, the le'umazeh, the other side, the other element, is skabrus, is trying to prevail. To disturb the person. Everyone knows, when you daven, all of a sudden everything, all cheshbonos come to your mind, and after davening you forget about them, yeah? As it says in Tanya, moshel oral ha'emid l'negdoi, that there's a guy who's standing in front of you, you're speaking dafka to disrupt your concentration. So that's what's happening. That is the dynamic of davening. There is going to be challenges. For this purpose, we have the Tallis Tefilin. Shenasim levush la'nefesh lahogim ba'dachitzim. So the Tallis Tefilin become like a garment, like this shield, to protect from the arrows of the enemy. So it's very interesting because we just talked about this shaila about, as I say, about wearing a tallis or not wearing a tallis. Still, this is not for davening, talking about Rabenu Tam, but the idea of wearing a tallis and tefillin is a protection from the machshavos, etc., which are going to challenge you. And I don't think he means it's a physical. I think he's saying that the mitzvah of wearing a tallis and tefillin becomes a protection, and it also becomes also b'hashgacha pratis. A shliach called me, asked me last week. He's traveling, was after Gimel Tammuz, he was traveling back to Europe, and he feels uncomfortable to put on tallis and tefillin in their plane. So and by the time he gets home, it's going to be 2 o'clock in the afternoon or something. Is there a justification for him to daven Shacharis without his tallis and tefillin? And then later he'll come home, he'll put on his tallis and tefillin and say Shema. So whatever I answered. But here you're seeing here that that's not a reason. That on the contrary, that one should be dafka trying to daven with a tallis and tefillin. And I say it was a shliach, and I wrote to him after I read the Maimer. I'm surprised a bit because we expect a yid on the street to put on tefillin. Yeah, you stop a yid on the street and you ask him to put on tefillin. You expect him. I don't know how you say in English. Five and half the Welt. You expect from him. So we should have less metal in ourselves. So what? You put on tallis and tefillin and take. You put on tallis and tefillin and you just sit in your place and you daven, and who cares? What about everything else? Just make sure you don't miss your flight if it's before the flight. Yeah. Okay, let's go on to the next thing. So here, I did not research this adequately, but here's the question. You have here these tefillin. Something seems to be a bit oversized in comparison to this head. But the question is, the tefillin are meant to be above the hairline. And this we learn from Psukim, because it says tefillin are meant to be bein einecho, between your eyes. And you might read that literally. They're meant to be the tefillin between your eyes or on your forehead. But then it says that they shouldn't rip out. One shouldn't rip out hair in grief. Bein einechem. You don't have hair bein einechem. Most people don't have hair between their eyes literally. So bein einechem means there above. It means that above the hairline. So the Gemara learns that also the tefillin should have to be bein. The bein einecho means above the hairline. But here's the question: how rigid is that? So first of all, the Beis contains the tefillin, but then around the Beis there's should we say, a bridge of sorts, extending. That's called the Titura. Does the Titura have to be also above the hairline? That's one question. Another question which we're dealing with here is the shape of the hairline, and somehow it's got a name in English, widow's peak, which is something to do with the widows used to wear in England a certain type of cap, and it would be like a beak, coming in the middle. So this is from Google. This fellow's got this hairline where the middle is lower and the sides go a little bit higher. Sometimes it's much more pronounced. And the question is, when the tefillin are meant to be no lower than the hairline, does that mean the middle hairline, or does the entire tefillin have to be above the hairline? In addition, what about the titura? Even if you say that the titura should be above the hairline, but does the entire titura, or does it mean just the middle and has to be above the hairline? So there's various opinions about this. So now let's see. Here we have a Simchov Zayin, this one Pisket Shuvis, where the tefillin should be above where the hairline begins. Shouldn't go lower down. And then he says you should be careful about the edges of the titura. Now they should also be above the hairline. So this is mamish our question. Some want to say that although the tefillin should be above the hairline, but if the edges of the titura are extending out of the hairline because of a widow's peak, some say that is permissible. Then there are those who are bichlal more lenient and allow even the titura per se to be lower down. They say that the issue of being above the hairline is only the tefillin proper, not the titura, the extending edge. I learned 3 years in Brunois yeshiva, and there was then at the time someone called Reb Sholmber Nemenov. He was at the time he was very ill, but he had asked the Rebbe apparently about hidurim in tefillin. He was an extreme mahader b'mitzvahs, and this is what I heard at the time, that there was one of the hidurim in tefillin is to have a very narrow titura. So whereas normally the titura, I haven't measured it, or let's say it's about 6 millimeters. By him, the titura was 2 millimeters. A very, very narrow titura, and of course, the stitching went through. They'd sofrim, or they will tell you that that's risky for the lasting of the tefillin, but that's what it was. So possibly that's also making a narrower titura is less worry of it going out overboard. Let's just read about this debate. Does the entire titura have to be above the hairline? So we have here in the Pisket Shuvas, he gives us a reference to a sefer called Shulchan Shloime. So that wasn't who's machmir. Then the Chakal Yitzchok is the one who's makel on this. That was one of the Spinker Rebbes, and he brings a whole debate about this. Then about the next thing, about whether the entire tefillin have to be above the hairline or the titura can be below the hairline, he gives us a reference to the Das Kedoshim, the Bechocha Rov. Now, I just want to tell you a story which I heard from Reb Aaron Tiefenbrunn, B'Shem Reb Henoch Padve, Zichron Livracha. So Reb Henoch Padve was the Rov here for many, many years in London. He was the Besdin, etc. I had the schus to learn with him, Talmud. At any rate, he lived in Eretz Yisrael. He met the Frierdiker Rebbe in Vienna, and he spent some time in Vienna, but then after the war, I don't know at what stage, he managed to get to Eretz Yisrael. He was a Talmud of the Teplikarov, Shamshon Polonsky. At any rate, he was also Makurov to the Belzerov, Reb Aaron. So that Reb Aaron came to Eretz Yisrael in the middle of the war. Frierdiker Rebbe was involved in his rescue. Yadu HaSipur. Reb Aaron sees Reb Henoch, and he says, do me a favor, adjust my tefillin. They're too tight for me. So he adjusts the tefillin, makes it a little bit wider. The girth should be a bit wider. No, it puts them on. No, mach a bit more. Make it a bit wider. Yeah. and it was already overstepping their hairline. And no, not haBechiro, maybe a bit more bigger. And so it made it, by then it was, the Titura was well below the hairline. Ja, ich gewiss dat you weiß wie zu machen a kesher from the film. He says to him, I knew that you know how to make the kesher of film properly. So you can see here that although the general position of the poskim is that even the Titura has to be above the hairline, but there are mekilim to allow that the Titura at least should be below the hairline. And it looks like the Belzer Rov relied on that. In my Siddur work, I have a quote of a letter of the Rebbe. This is to Reb Dov Lent, who asked the Rebbe about the Rebbe's tefillin being lower than the hairline. And he receives an answer from the Rebbe without a heading, not on headed paper. That which you're asking about Pliny, who has his tefillin lower than the hairline, it could be he didn't realize. First, it could be that he had, when he was younger, a lower hairline. Also, it could be he didn't realize that he slipped down a bit, something on those lines. But the Rebbe did not mention that there's a svara that the Titura can be lower than the hairline. Ad kan, our discussion about this. So, we are mishtadel that everything should be above the hairline. Let's move on. What's the next point? So here in our at the Kinos Hashluchim, so I gave a shiur there, and someone asks a question at the shiur. We were talking about security. Unfortunately, that's very topical now. Talking about what can be done, can't be done, and so he's asking about having a CCTV camera, which is now standard. But here the question is a different take. That you have a shul that has a CCTV, and then people come to shul. How can they get into the building? So the simple thing is you can have some kind of number lock. But instead of having a number lock, could you have that people can see on the CCTV, Reb Yankel has come, someone goes and opens the door for him. Reb Baruch comes, someone goes and opens the door for him. So then, when Reb Yankel and Reb Baruch are coming up the path towards the shul, towards the building of the shul, they have every intention of being filmed, so that the people inside should know to come to the door and let them in. So that's really the question. I was not keen about it. So here we have from a couple of, shall we say, contemporary poskim. This one is from Reb Moshe Sternbuch in Tshuvas v'Hanhagos, and he's talking about the television screen, the short closed-circuit TV, and he says that the fact that you're walking past it is really not so significant. It's not kind of not called a ma'aser malacha. And all right, so he's not so keen about it. The general approach is that you're not getting any benefit from it. The reason why you have a security camera is to keep out the criminals. Let them be photographed. But for the Yidden who are coming past it, when you come into your own house or to the shul, and you're picked up on the screen, on the CCTV, but you have no interest in it. That's why this question threw me a bit, because you do have an interest. So in Piskei Teshuvos, it makes a difference whether it is registered. Most CCTV retains footage in case they have to go back. It's filming. It's not just live and the next minute is gone. They retain footage, and therefore they want to say that it's considered like writing. You are registering an image. I'm not so convinced about that, because let's say you're allowed to carry your phone into a Beis HaKisei, even though it has the siddur in it, because it's not there. It's digital storage. Is not there's no writing there. You can develop from it, but it's not actual writing. If you have a siddur on the screen, you'd kivovke, and you close the thing, you're not erasing Hashem's name. It's because it's not a metzias. So therefore, I don't see so strongly that argument that because it's being recorded, therefore you're writing. But be that as it may, let's come back to our question. Walking in front of a screen, and you do want to be seen with that screen. That's our question over here. So this we have here from the Betzela Chochma, who's Rebbe Tzal Stern. So he's a brother of the Debreciner Rov. He was known as the Hermannstädter Rov, and he spent many years as a Rov in Melbourne. One of his particular forte is the union of Zmanim, of travel, etc. And actually, I have a sefer which a grandson of his put out called Ahalich Bar Mitecho, all about travel. Living in Australia, so travel was perhaps a more relevant thing than, the shilas about travel, Dateline, all that were relevant more than elsewhere. But he is addressing the same question. So to stand at the front door, and your image is going to be recorded on the screen, and so the guard inside will know to come and open the door for you. He's not really concerned about it, even though making a picture on Shabbos is a avera. But he says, so if you're and even to make a temporary picture is also midrabanon. Like writing, temporary writing. So to make a temporary picture is also not okay. He says that's not even a temporary. He says it's like looking in a mirror. Yeah, you look in the mirror. So you created an image. Heter Gomer, you're allowed to look in a mirror. You give him some limitations, but you're allowed to look in the mirror on Shabbos. So the same thing, he sees that being seen on the screen is like just looking in a mirror. And that he's not worried. He's not worried about the electronic side about it, apparently. They change it because the changes are really minimal. There's not more or less electricity. So he's not objecting. So on that basis, on basis of the Debretsinas, of the B'Tselach Chochmah, perhaps one could allow this idea of being of the closed circuit TV to allow a person to come in, and but as you see, the previous one wasn't very happy about it. I'm not so sure whether that would be okay. And as I say, a number lock would solve the problem. You don't have to go into this color. All right, but having seen now that there is an opinion that being seen on a CCTV is not a problem, even if you want that. Yeah, because if you don't want that, we have the klal of psikresha de loy. When you walk from my street, from my house to Beis Lubavitch, I've been photographed 50 times on different shops and the streets and so whatever. But that I have no interest. But here the person does have an interest. That's why I'm concerned. But let's say there is room to be made. So here, Bashgocha Protis, one of our faithful listeners, is joining us today also, he was asked a question about voice to text. So the person who's deaf, and they have a kind of contraption, probably looks like a phone, and whoever speaks, so the has a facility, changes your words from Torah Shebal Peh to Torah Shebichsav. So are you allowed to use that on Shabbos? Are you allowed to speak to such a person on Shabbos? And I'm going to go into this in more detail. My hashkafa rishono, I don't see a huge difference between standing in front of a CCTV camera and my image is now on the screen in the other room, and standing in front of and speaking in front of an app, and my words are now coming up on the screen. Again, those words are they're not recorded there. I don't know, but it doesn't have to be recorded. So I'm not so sure that it's also. So before we deal with that, this is from Shmiras Shabbos Hilchosa about speaking to someone who's wearing a hearing aid. Generally, it's accepted that you are allowed to speak to someone who's wearing a hearing aid on Shabbos. So here we have Shlomo Zalman says you're allowed to speak to a person who's wearing a hearing aid because the sounds going through the piece of equipment, although they are doing some effect on some of the equipment, but those changes in the transmitter, etc., are so short that they are less than a moment, rega kememere, and therefore even the Chazon Ish says electricity is boina soiser, but this is so short, so millisecond, whatever it may be, so that does not, can't call it boina. Now I don't understand his next sentence. I don't know whether it's because I don't understand Hebrew enough, or I don't understand the electronics. If it's such a piece of equipment that the changes are in the wire, which is bringing the current, and Chazon Ish loy boroli. So I don't know what he means by this. But meanwhile, we're seeing here that he is matir to speak to someone who's wearing a hearing aid because it's such a minimal change, and therefore perhaps but coming back to the voice to text, perhaps he wouldn't be so lenient. But he says here it's pochas me'arega kememra, the changes are really minimal. But in the case of the voice to text, of course it's not so short. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to read it. It's going to last for a few seconds. Perhaps then he would be machmir. Well, I looked around. I couldn't find this in Sforim. I looked around on social media, etc. I saw that it's reported that the Rabbanim are not matter such a thing. So I'm not going to be the one who says it is okay. All right. So that's a discussion about the voice to text app on Shabbos. And the bottom line is I wasn't ready to say it's okay. Okay. So here, it's a totally different question. Someone has a Sefer Torah, which he wants to bring it from here to somewhere in California, and it's not so convenient for him to carry it with him. Is he able to put it in the luggage? Or send it with a courier service? So we have here, this is in the dinim of Sefer Torah, Simaresh Pei Beis. If you are traveling from one place to another with a Sefer Torah, do not put it in a bag and put it on the donkey, and then you'll sit on top of it. But rather, you should hold it in your bosom next to your heart, and you'll hold it. You'll carry it on the donkey like that. If, however, you're fearful of ganovim, that if you're going to carry it in a more respectful way, it might get stolen, then you are allowed to put it in the luggage and sit on top of it. That's because you're doing so to protect the Sefer Torah. Now, our case is neither here nor there. It's not talking about sitting on it or anything like that. But there is a concern that usually in luggage, things are thrown around, and certainly they're sent in post from country to country. So is that going to be a compromise in the covet which we should be giving to Sefer Torah? So there is a letter of the Rebbe in Shulchan Menachem about someone who worked in the post, and he threw a package which came to deliveries, and he threw everyone, and then afterwards he realized there's a Sefer Torah in there, and he felt very bad that he'd done this, and he writes to the Rebbe about this, and the Rebbe gives him fasting, etc., and it mitigates it because it was wrapped up. But meanwhile, that reference gave me a reference to there's a volume from Niti Gavriel all about dedication of a Sefer Torah. So he has a chapter about transfer of a Sefer Torah from one country to the other. So he says, first of all, if you're traveling by boat and you want to put your Sefer Torah amongst the luggage, you should put the Sefer Torah one box inside another. The idea being that you have an inner box and outer box, and also you put stuffing in the inner box that shouldn't be shifting around freely. But if someone sits on the outer case, they would not be weighing down onto the Sefer Torah, which is in the inner case, because there is a box inside a box. That's the basic guidance which I answered, to put it inside a hard cover, a suitcase inside another one, and that way it's protected. Then he goes on more details. He mentions if you're traveling by plane, you should put the Sefer Torah with a hand luggage, And if you do that, then you don't need to put it in a double box. What he does say is that if you needed to, Sefer Torah is actually, with the handles, it's very big. Without the handles, it's that much smaller, shorter. So a Sefer Torah without the handles could probably fit in a large sports bag. Once it's got the handles on, it's quite. So he says you are allowed to have the stitches removed at the beginning and the end of the Sefer Torah. And so that's just the parchment that's going to be much more manageable for transport. And so he says you are allowed to do that, and then you'll send the Atzichaim separately, put it in luggage, etc. Right. Someone has identified who the picture of that peak, widow's peak is. I actually Dafka cut away the rest of the face that you shouldn't see who it is. So didn't think it was negay to the shiur who it was. Yeah, but amazing recollection. Okay, what if one can't remember where his original hairline was? Good question. Perhaps you go back to some kiddie pictures, some cute kiddie pictures. You might be able to see where your hairline was. You can ask now another question. Yeah, after this. What happens which under bar mitzvah you had a lower hairline, and when you were bar mitzvah your hairline was higher? I don't know. All right, let's move on. So someone asked me, Tallis, are nicotine pouches permitted on a fast day? Now, I'm going to confess, I did not know. I thought a nicotine pouch is something like a patch which you put in your arm, but apparently it's something which you put in your mouth. And are you allowed to have those in your mouth on a fast day? So here we have from Mishnah Berurah, it says about not to smoke titun of Arbat Soimos, especially not on Tisha B'Av. And he quotes the Knesset Agdola, who was a very, very machmir. He says a person who smokes on Tisha B'Av is deserving of nidui, etc. Really very heavy. Others are more lenient, and some people, if they're addicted smokers, it's very difficult for them to go through a day without smoking. And so he says to be mekel on Tisha B'Av after Chatzos. Generally, I believe this is not followed, this not to smoke. It's also to understand that Knesset Agdola may have been talking about a different type of, not cigarettes, but a different type of thing. Now, in the Piskei Teshuvos, he brings here about various people who said they needed to smoke to be able to have their usual functions. And then he quotes from Zecher Yehosef, who was actually a very interesting mechaber. I think his name is Beis, but he was a very interesting writer. He writes that the Knesset Agdola, who was so against this to the degree of nidui, he says because in his time he was just after the whole story of Shabtai Tzvi. And as you may know the history, that the people in the time of Shabtai Tzvi, they said, oh, Tisha B'Av is obsolete because Mashiach is here and we can celebrate. And because there had been such a disgrace of Tisha B'Av, therefore they felt the need to go to the other extreme and to say that even smoking, which is not such an issue, wouldn't be allowed. Now, again, someone asked me about a hookah. I don't know what a hookah, what it is. Does it bring moisture into your mouth? That could be a question, yeah. So in the Knesset Agdola and shiur Knesset Agdola, there's two sets. There's a series Knesset Agdola, and then there's another series shiur Knesset Agdola. I looked it up. He has a long discussion of several pages. But here he has the very interesting. There are people who they're smoking this titoin on Yom Tov and on a Tallis. He says you can't have it both ways. If it's allowed on Yom Tov, you're saying it's like food. If it's food, then you're not allowed to have it on a fast day. If you're saying, and if you're allowed to have it on a fast day, it's not food. If it's not food, then what's the justification to use it to make a fire to have it on Yom Tov? So he challenges them on both. Like the two heterim are contradictory. Okay. Finally, we have our last thing on our list for today. So someone's asking me, he's got a 9-year-old boy, and in these long summer Shabbosim, well, they're long in winter also, but the daytime is longer, yeah? So the kids can't stay up till 11 o'clock for Havdalah, so they go to sleep at a reasonable time. Is there a point of making Havdalah or having the kids make Havdalah on Sunday morning? See, that was his question. So I challenged him. I says, do you remember making Havdalah on Sunday morning? Did your father make you make Havdalah on Sunday morning? And he confessed that no. Well, I'll tell you, my father also never made me make Havdalah on Sunday morning. So that's the widespread Minhag Yisrael. So let's take a look. So here we have Piskei Tshuva in Simareis Tzadik Zayin. He says that if they didn't hear Havdalah, one should be mechanech them to make Havdalah in the morning. Then he says, Omnom, in the footnote, this is what he says in the opinion. Then he refers to B'tzel HaChochma, which mentioned before, and others. But the Shalosh Manu, we haven't heard that we should be mechanech ketanim to do tashlumin. You have a mitzvah, and then you have an opportunity to compensate for missing out on the mitzvah. We don't know about such a thing, seeing that children should be mischanech. Oh, you missed it then? Oh, now you make it up for it another time. We haven't seen that. And I want to add to that. If your boy did not daven Ma'ariv because it was past his bedtime, have you ever heard of someone telling your boy, oh, Shachris, you should daven twice for an Esther. Because you missed Ma'ariv, you have to daven twice for an Esther for Shachris. It's unheard of. And basically, this is the approach. Since at the time they couldn't do the mitzvah, and now you're talking about to compensate for missing out an earlier thing, that we don't make an issue of it. Okay, my brother is saying that we regularly made Havdalah on Shabbos morning, on Sunday morning. Okay, I don't remember that. Okay, could be a couple of years before I was.
Yes, we did. We each had our own cup of grape juice.
Okay, I don't remember. It's more than 50 years ago, so I can plead that I've forgotten. Okay, good. Okay, but Akoponim it's not a widespread minhag, and so okay. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I wish you a good Shabbos. And these days you have chol simcha, sosin moedim tovim, simchas olam al roshom, ula amitis v'ashleimo with Mashiach tzedkein. Kol tov.